Don't go to Dudleytown, Connecticut. This is not a prank, it's not a stunt, it's not clickbait, it's the truth. Dr. William C. Clark and his wife Harriet were driving slowly through a beautiful part of northwestern Connecticut called Litchfield County. And the Clarks were there to try to scout out an area to build their second home. And high up on this mountain was this huge, shaded, beautiful forest. And they saw there was a road that appeared to kind of spider off and go into these woods. Now, the couple had no idea what was up there, but it was just so beautiful, and they were immediately so drawn to it that they decided they would go check it out. And very quickly, as they began climbing up this hillside, the road became very bumpy and overgrown. And so before they even reached the tree line, Dr. Clark had to pull the car over and park it on the side of the road. And then he and Harriet got out, and then on foot, they continued up towards the forest. And then up ahead, they saw there was this field off to the side of the road that was full of all these wild apple trees growing in all different directions. This forest was sitting on a hillside, and the hillside, which was made up of rock, had mica inside of it. And mica is a kind of mineral that when sunlight hits it, it almost looks like it's shimmering. By the time the couple had turned around and begun heading back to their car, they had already made up their mind that they were going to build their second home in that forest. It was called Dark Entry, and it was named that because it looked like from the outside, the forest was basically dark all the time. At one time, there actually had been a town inside of Dark Entry Forest. However, all the people who had lived in that town were now all gone. The only remnants of this town were a couple of crumbling stone walls and a couple of home foundations that were scattered about the Dark Entry forest floor. The Clarks had seen some of these ruins as they walked along this overgrown path through the forest, but they weren't concerned. Instead, they felt like these ruins actually added some charm to the forest. After the land purchase was finalized, Dr. Clark began looking for local builders in Connecticut who could help him build this second home inside of Dark Entry Forest. But no matter how much money he offered these local Connecticut builders, they all said no. Now, none of them gave a straight answer to Dr. Clark about why they were turning him down. So Dr. Clark just kind of assumed that, hey, this project is not huge. It's just one house. And the forest is pretty isolated and hard to get to. And so he thought, probably these builders think it's not worth the effort. He decided he would just build the house himself. First, he cut down this massive swath of hemlock trees on this one flat patch of his land. And then with all this lumber he had cut down, he built his rustic two-story cabin on this flat part of his land. Dr. Clark built a swimming pool with beautiful mossy embankments right up against this brook so he could sit there and watch the fish. By Thanksgiving of that year, the cabin was done, and so Dr. Clark and his wife Harriet, they stayed at the cabin to celebrate the holiday. So every summer from there on out, and every major holiday that they could manage it, the Clarks would travel to their home in Dark Entry Forest, and they would swim and hike and relax. It was perfect. That is, until 1918. That summer, the couple was in their second home in the forest when Dr. Clark was suddenly called back to New York to attend to a medical emergency. Harriet was very upset at the prospect of suddenly being left alone in this cabin in the middle of the forest by herself for who knows how many days. And so when she dropped her husband off at the nearby train platform, she made him promise that he would come back soon. And he said he would. And then Dr. Clark got on the train. It took off. From his comfortable seat on that train, Dr. Clark had no idea that his wife was about to endure a nightmare while he was gone. When the Clarks bought their 1,000 acres in the Dark Entry Forest, they did virtually no research on the forest or the surrounding area. If they had, they very likely would not have purchased that land. You see, the town that used to be inside of the Dark Entry Forest, that was now just ruins that the Clarks saw when they first walked around inside of the forest, was abandoned for a very specific reason. It was cursed. At least that's what the locals say. And in fact, that was the reason why no builders in the area were willing to go with Dr. Clark into the forest to go build his house, because they were too scared to go anywhere near the ruins of this cursed town. This town, which was known as Dudleytown, was first settled sometime in the 1740s. At first, it was just a couple of people and a couple of small structures, but pretty quickly, 30 families had moved in, and it was a thriving little town. But as the 1700s came to a close, terrible things began to happen to residents of this town. First, there was the Carter family. They moved to Dudleytown in 1759, and shortly after arriving there, 6 members of their family all died suddenly from cholera. The remaining branch of the Carter family was so grief-stricken from their losses that they left Dudleytown and went to New York, where they resettled. But almost immediately after getting set up there, Native Americans raided their property and massacred them, and the 3 people that survived this massacre were 3 of the kids, and they were all kidnapped and taken away. In 1792, a Dudley resident named Hollister died suddenly. Now, we don't know if he fell off a roof or if he was murdered. No one really knows. But what we can agree on is that his untimely death happened in the home of a man named Tanner. And Tanner, following Hollister's death, suddenly just began obsessively talking about these strange creatures he was seeing out in the woods at night, kind of roaming around the dark entry forest. And he talked about it all the time, and nobody listened to him. And eventually, Tanner went insane, and his daughter had to care for him for the rest of his life. And while Tanner was slowly losing his mind, his next-door neighbor, named Abel, also began reporting that he was seeing weird creatures roaming around the tree line all around the town. And as Abel continued to report seeing these strange creatures lurking in the shadows, he too slowly went mad and had to be cared for until his death. In the early 1800s, a famous Revolutionary War hero, General Herman Swift, who lived in Dudleytown, lost his mind shortly after his wife was struck by lightning. And then in 1813, an unknown epidemic rolled through Dudleytown and killed many of its residents. After that, more and more residents of Dudleytown either died suddenly or died mysteriously, and also more and more residents began coming forward with stories about having seen these strange, shadowy creatures moving around the tree line at night. By about 1900, all the Dudleytown residents had either died or simply just left, abandoning their homes, except for one family, the Brophies. But in quick succession, the Brophy family's sheep all died, then the mother died of tuberculosis, then the 2 sons were accused of theft in a nearby town, and then they just disappeared, leaving one person, John Brophy, the father. But the Brophy family home burned to the ground, and so John, who was overcome with grief, just wandered off into the forest and was never heard from again. At that point, Dudleytown officially became a ghost town. No one lived there. And it was at that point, in 1906, when Dr. Clark and Harriet had their beautiful summer's day walk through the forest and discovered where they wanted to build their second home. So, fast forward back to 1918, and Dr. Clark, he's on his medical emergency leave to New York. It winds up being very quick. He's back on a train within 36 hours, and he pulls into the station right near Dark Entry Forest, and he's expecting to see Harriet waiting on the platform for him. But when the train rolled into the station, she wasn't there. Now, Dr. Clark was not a superstitious person, but for some reason, when he didn't see his wife there, he just felt like something was off. There's no reason she wouldn't have come out here to greet him. I mean, she was worried about being all alone in the cabin, and she knew he was going to be arriving at that moment. And so, feeling a little bit panicked, Dr. Clark left the train station and on foot made his way over to the Dark Entry Forest. And when he got there and began walking on that overgrown road path that led to his house, immediately, as soon as he was within the shade of the trees, he began hearing these owls hooting very loudly off in the distance. Now, normally, the sound of these owls hooting made him feel welcome, but this time he felt scared. He felt like something was wrong up ahead. And so he began jogging through the forest, and it's very dark, and all he can hear is the sound of these owls, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. And then finally he reaches the clearing where his property is. And at this point, it's a cacophony of owls hooting practically right on top of him. And he looks up towards his house up on this hill, and he sees the front door is slightly open. And so now, with his heart racing, wondering what's going on with his wife, Dr. Clark runs up to his front porch. He gets to the door and he flings it open the rest rest of the way, and then right before he stepped into his house, this sudden high-pitched noise began up on the second floor inside of his house. And it was so startling to Dr. Clark that he just froze where he was. And so suddenly it's so loud from the owls all around him and the woods behind him and whatever this noise is that he just stood there unsure what to do. And so as he's sitting there getting the courage up to go investigate his house, he realizes what this high-pitched noise is. It's the sound of maniacal, insane laughter coming from the second floor. Sensing his wife had to be in danger, the doctor charged up the nearby steps up to the second floor, and he could tell this laughter, this high-pitched laughter, was coming from the master bedroom. And so he ran down the short hallway, he got in front of the closed door that led into the master bedroom, he slowly opened it up, and there, in the back corner of his room, was his wife. She was on the ground, rolled up in a ball, facing the door. Her hands were clenched in fists, her eyes were open and unblinking, and her mouth was open wider than was humanly possible. And as he's staring at his wife, wondering what's going on, he realizes this insane, high-pitched laughter is coming from his wife. But it doesn't even look like it's coming out of her. Her chest is just heaving, her mouth is staying open, and the laughter is just coming out of her. And so the doctor just stood there watching his wife, who's staring directly at his eyes. And finally, he just got so scared, he turned and he ran. During Dr. Clark's 36 hours he was away in New York, something happened to his wife. We don't know what it was, but it caused her to lose her mind. The only thing she would talk about was the strange creatures she saw out in the forest. By some accounts, Harriet spent the rest of her life in a mental asylum. By other accounts, she went back with Dr. Clark to New York, where she took her life. Today, Dudleytown is not only still abandoned, but it is also illegal to visit. However, people do still sneak into Dudleytown and walk around the ruins, and many of them have reported feeling these pockets of cold air where there shouldn't be cold air, and also some others have said, as they've been walking, they've felt phantom hands slap them and push them. Some have said they've taken photographs inside of the Dark Entry Forest near Dudleytown, and they've captured strange, shadowy figures that they couldn't see with their naked eye. The famous paranormal couple, Ed and Lorraine Warren, shot a special series in the 1970s inside of the Dark Entry Forest, and they declared the area around Dudleytown was demonically possessed.